Hi, everyone. My name is Jackie De La Rosa Kennedy. I know it's a mouthful. I'm on the AWS Startup Business Development team focused on early stage founders. I previously started a company called Oasis out of Boston, and I'm also a part-time venture partner at a pre-seed VC fund in San Francisco. Joining us today, which I'm very excited about, is Michael Seibel, the CEO of Y Combinator. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm happy to be here.
So we have about, looks like 210 founders that joined us virtually today, and they're all interested in applying to YC. And they come from all over, anywhere, regions from the US, Canada, and Latin America. So it's really a global audience. So before we jump in, founders, if you do have questions for Michael, please add your questions in the questions toolbar. If you look to the right hand of your screen, you'll see questions, add that in there, and I'll go through those questions and pick the ones out so Michael can answer them. So it looks like it's 1:40 my time. We're a little over, so we'll try to wrap things up around 2:10 Eastern. So we have 30 minutes with Michael. Cool. So are you ready, Michael?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So I know the application deadline is right around the corner. Can you tell us a little bit about the recruiting process from partners reviewing applications to startups getting accepted? What does that look like?
The application review process, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's somewhat complicated. So there is an initial review of applications because we accept all applications with no qualification. It's kind of an initial browse of the applications to figure out which ones are kind of high quality and which ones aren't, which will tend to sort about 50% of the applications out of the pool. Then partners will start reading applications and read the other 50% of applications and vote on them. Each application will be read by three partners. Based on then a stack ranking of those votes, we will select a set of companies, typically around 1,000, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little less, to interview. We'll interview those companies over the course of about 3 weeks. We used to fly companies out. Now, of course, we do it remotely. Each interview is 10 minutes, and we let companies know whether they got in or not that same day of the interview. And so from a pool of anywhere from 12,000 to about 15,000 companies who apply, we'll break that down to about 200 to 250 companies in a batch.
Wow. So you read a lot of applications.
Yeah, we read a lot of applications, yes.
So what are the things that make an application stand out from the rest?
I think what's so interesting is that I think a lot of the normal process of pitching investors unfortunately fails founders when they figure out the YC application. The YC application really rewards no jargon. I think that the number one thing that we see right off the bat is the answer to the question, what does your company do? And I would say that probably about 50% of the applications, we read the answer to that question and we don't know what the company does. And usually the reason why is that there's just a lot of words in there that kind of confuse the issue. For example, I heard a pitch from a founder yesterday. I was doing some outreach, and before he asked a question, he said, "Oh, I'm working on a parametric insurance company, and here's my question." And I was just kind of like, I don't even know. I don't know what parametric insurance is. I don't know what service you provide. I don't know who your customers are. And so somehow something gets lost in translation where, like, if you just explain in really plain language what you do, you're already probably ahead of 50% of the applications. But if you kind of use maybe the jargon that your customers expect or the jargon of your industry, it gets a lot harder to just figure out what you do. I would say the second thing we look at is the ability to build the product. A lot of folks apply to YC, but they don't have the ability on the team to actually build the product. So they're relying on outsource engineering, which is so hard to make work, it's almost impossible. The third thing is how much progress the company is making over time. A lot of founders ask, what stage do I have to be in order to raise money with YC? And unlike the normal startup world where it's like, pre-seed investors like these types of companies, seed investors like these types, A's, so on and so forth, like YC will fund companies. When we have funded a company that's doing $40 million in revenue when they got into YC. And we funded companies that completely changed their idea when they're in YC. So they're starting from scratch, anywhere in between. And so if you're thinking, oh, I have to be at this stage to get into YC, you're not really thinking about it the right way. What we look for is just how much progress you're making over time. And if you're building, let's say a dating app, and it's a month in, and you already have your app built well enough that you can start demoing it, and you already have 10 people trying it out, well, that sounds like you're moving pretty quickly. That's exciting, right? If you're building the same dating app and it's been 18 months and you haven't launched yet, well, doesn't seem like you're moving very quickly. I think sometimes kind of founders miss that element of like, we're not really grading their idea, we're grading the amount of forward motion they're creating. And then the last one is the relationship between the co-founders. In the early days, your co-founder is your primary support system. And I think that too often founders are overemphasizing like skills that co-founders, most startups die, right? So, if you're a business founder looking to recruit a CTO, and your thought is my CTO has to have experience managing, 1,000 people, it's like, okay, well, most likely your startup's going to die before your CTO is managing 10 people. So maybe you should be thinking slightly differently about what are the things you're looking for that are going to help you in the very early stage. And it turns out that like people people you have a work or personal relationship with, who you've gone through some tough times with, tend to be better co-founders than people who just have what you perceive to be the optimal skill overlap. And also how you compensate your co-founders with equity is really important. You're really communicating to them, investors, other people, how valuable your co-founder is by how much equity you give them. And we see sometimes teams where the business people have a lot of equity and the technical people don't. And the first thing we think in that situation is, why is that tech person going to stay? And if that business person's there alone, why would we fund this company? So right. Those are the top line things. You check those boxes, more often than not, you get an interview.
That's great. I love the idea of forward motion, right? Showing that you're progressing in some capacity. I know a lot of teams reapply to YC, so they've been rejected once or twice. What are you looking for in an application if someone's been previously rejected and going to reapply?
Yeah, if you think about it, in a strange way, you probably have an advantage on your second application. I think that a lot of people try to time their first application weirdly. And like, I would argue that like, it's a lot easier to discern the trend of your business if we have 2 data points versus 1. And so instead of trying to like time the application perfectly, like I probably would apply as early as possible. And then if you're keep running, I'd keep applying. And many companies get in on their second, third, fourth application. The number one thing we're looking at is what's changed since the last application. And there are a lot of fake things that changed that are not exciting. We brought on these advisors. We participated in another accelerator. We went from the alpha version of our product to the V2 alpha version of our product. Like a lot of these things are like kind of fake progress, right? Like if you hadn't launched in your first application, we would assume you'd launch by your second application. If you were launching your first application, we'd assume you'd have customers by your second application, right? Like, so once again, it's this progress over time. Are we reading your second application and thinking, oh man, we made a mistake on the first one? or reading your second application and thinking, oh yeah, we pegged this pretty well on your first one. You haven't made much progress since. I think that's the mindset you should be thinking about.
Totally. That's super helpful. And I know that the last two batches were pretty global, like somewhere around 40 to 50% were non-US teams, which is incredible, and a testament to the success of YC. If non-US teams are tackling a regional problem, how should the founder inform the YC partner or the reader of the application of the specifics of the region?
You know, to be honest, like most YC partners now have dealt with companies in every significant startup region. And so, you know, this might have been more of an issue 4 or 5 years ago than it would be today. Two, I just don't think this is a major problem. I think this is kind of a little bit blown out of proportion. I'll put it this way. You shouldn't assume that the person reading your application is an expert in your industry at all. You shouldn't assume they're an expert in your customers at all. And you should be explaining your product from the perspective of you're not talking to an expert. And so, you know, I would say to some founder who is selling something to Americans, they should do the same work to inform us of which Americans want this and why do they want this and what their problem is, as a founder in Southeast Asia selling a product to Indonesians. Like, it's the same work. And so I would never take for granted that anyone you're talking to, even people from your own country, understand the problem you're solving or the customers that you're trying to solve it for.
Totally. And a lot of the times when I talk with founders and I either review their application or try to give pointers, I just always say, know your audience, right? Your audience are people who might not know your customers as well as you do, right? And that's a lot harder to do in your application than me just saying it. Tell us about a really impressive application you've read recently and what was so interesting about it.
Well, I'll tell you an extraordinary one that's not typical in every way. You know, the bread and butter YC company is going to be a software company of some sort, and I'll tell you a software one. I'll tell you a not software one. I'll start with a non-software one. A founder, a single non-technical female founder, coming out of business school, applied to YC a couple years ago with a hair care startup. I think if you were to think about YC, this would check all of the boxes of something that we wouldn't fund. And in our first application, it was just an idea, and we didn't fund it. And in her second application, 6 months later, she had found a chemist to design a formula for her product. It was a product for women with curly hair. She had launched she built a Shopify store herself. She had found she scraped together some money to buy initial product. She'd found a small space where she could do her own fulfillment. She launched her Shopify store, and she was selling $100,000 worth of product a month. And I remember reading that application, I remember thinking, I'm throwing all of what we normally do out of the window because this person is clearly ridiculously impressive. And the kind of overarching golden rule is no matter what you think about anything, you fund really impressive people because you want to help them do what they want to do. And I think that people don't understand enough how high the bar is. I actually think in the startup world, you need to be reaching for a really high bar. You need to be thinking, how can I be better than everyone around me? Like, so few people succeed that you have to be thinking like just being an average startup means you're a dead startup walking.
Right.
And we say this to YC companies as well. The first day, at kickoff, we say the vast majority of you within the next 2 to 4 years are going to be dead. And getting into YC is not some major accomplishment. Like, there's still infinite work to do. A second application that I read that I thought was particularly interesting. A founder a founder had a girlfriend who had an opioid addiction, and she didn't want to go to treatment. It turns out most treatment doesn't involve there are prescription drugs you can use to try to reduce the symptoms when you're going through opioid withdrawal. Most actual in-person rehab centers don't really offer that type of treatment. Also, they can be expensive. There's a bit of a stigma associated with going to them, so on and so forth, and they're not particularly effective. So his girlfriend actually attempted to get access to the drugs that would help with withdrawal herself on the street. She was treating her withdrawal, and she had a relapse where she started using opiates again. But unfortunately, she did not know what her level of tolerance was. She took too much, she died. And this founder, her boyfriend, kind of was witnessing this whole thing happening and basically saying, this is stupid. Like this is a solvable problem here. This is and the more he learned about the space, the more he kind of ripped apart the assumption of what an opioid addict looks like. I think there's this weird assumption in popular culture that like an opioid addict doesn't have a job, is living on the streets, and so on and so forth, which is like the furthest thing from true. Most opioid addicts are functional until their addiction gets so bad that it starts ruining their life. And during that functional component, they don't want to blow up their whole life and go to rehab, even if they want to get off the drugs. And so he decided that he was going to recruit a friend of his who writes code, and together they're going to try to figure out a way to help opioid addicts get access to prescription medicine to help them kick their addiction. And yeah, it was great. You read an application like that and you're like, this is awesome. Like, one, you're teaching me stuff that I don't know. Two, you're clearly passionate about this. And three, this is clearly a problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, totally. It's a moving personal narrative and something that I'm assuming he's going to be super motivated to solve for. I'm going to take some questions from the founders that joined us. This one I get a lot. If we pivoted, and this is from Ethan, if we pivot away from what we did from the previous applications, do you expect to see a clean slate application? Should we describe our previous effort? To what extent? Yes.
Yeah, I would say pivot is used in so many ways that it's really hard to answer that question. If you have decided since the last application that you want to serve a completely different customer and solve a completely different problem for that customer, then sure, we don't really need to know the previous history. If in reality what you're doing is just changing how your solution works, but you're keeping that customer and that problem the same, then like, yeah, you should probably include that history because it's going to inform how you decide to change the product. The failure mode that I actually see most often is none of the sort. It's no love for the customer and no love for the problem. It's love for the idea and the solution. And so, the failure mode that I see most often is, we built this doodad because we thought it was cool to help solve this problem we didn't understand that well. It's not solving it, and so we're now going to try to give it to anyone else who might want it to see if it solves their problem. Which is this kind of weird thing of like, I don't really understand the idea behind that, right? If the core purpose of a company is to provide some service to someone, it seems like you should know who that someone is and what their problem is before you start writing code. But I think that in a weird way, like, some people's startups are vanity exercises. It's, I believe this should exist in the world, and I don't care whether people want it or it solves anyone's problem. And because that's their mental model on what a startup is. It's just kind of bringing something forth into the world, which is totally fine. But if you guessed wrong, which is really easy to do, and then you're just going to repeat that process over and over again of like handing it to someone else that you don't know very well,
Right.
That's the failure mode that's most common, that like it's not really very healthy.
Right. Totally. Jessica asks, can you give us some examples on answers for this question, which is in the YC application? Please tell us about the time you most successfully hacked some non-computer system to your advantage. Always a really fun, creative question.
Yeah, I think the point that we're trying to get to here is like, how do you get things done when the obvious path isn't available to you? You know, when you think about what we mean by a hack, it's a workaround. It's, you know, the most basic thing that like most suburban kids would remember is like, how would you get into your house if the front door is locked? Right? That's the most basic hack, right? And so what we're really trying to get to is that a lot of times in startups, the front door is not available to you. Microsoft and Google and whoever else are the big guys you're competing with you, they've got the front door blocked off. And you got to figure out how to find the cracked window in the basement and like crawl through that. And so we just want to understand, like, what other times in your life did you have to not walk through the front door to accomplish what you wanted to do? You had to find the cracked window in the basement. And everyone has these moments. It's actually quite depressing when somebody answers, I don't have one, because it's just like, yeah, you do. Like everyone has these.
Right, right.
No one gets to walk through the front door in all situations.
Yeah. And in the cat video we played earlier, she talks about the curious hacker, looking for people who are just generally curious about how things work and how you can fix things and what's that intricacy. And so I'm assuming that is really what you're looking for in that question.
Yeah, it's really simple, right? You're gonna, in order to succeed, you're gonna have to find a lot of workarounds. So what are the workarounds you've found in your life before this point? It's that simple. Like, to succeed in the startup, people are not going to open the front door and welcome you in. No incumbent, no competitor is going to say, oh, here, take my customers. And so you have to get very good at not walking in the front door.
Right, right. Another great question from Aditya. Do you fund similar companies or competitive companies batch over batch?
Yes. Oh, yes, 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 yes. So YC has funded competitors through its entire history. In fact, when I did YC in 2012, there was a direct competitor to my company in the batch. The reason why it's very simple, we fund very early stage companies. Competition almost never kills our companies, almost never. The number one thing that's going to kill our companies typically is they're not actually solving a problem that people have. And the number two thing is some form of losing the faith or broken relationship between the co-founders. And so the other thing that's extremely common is people switching their idea or switching the problem that they're solving, right? Even if you look at my first startup, right, which, you know, ended as Twitch, it started as a reality TV show, then it was a platform for anyone to broadcast live video, and then it was a platform for video games. And so, God forbid, YC didn't fund another online reality TV show startup because we were working on an online reality TV show. It wouldn't make any sense. And so, yeah, we fund competitors all the time. And let's be clear, we have processes and systems in place so that we're not sharing information between them. We're not going to share your private information. But like, to be honest, right, most startups die. And so if people are really, really motivated and really, really talented, why wouldn't we give them a shot?
Yeah, totally. This question comes from Vince. Could you speak to what makes for a successful YC hardware company, especially if they're pre-product? So I'm assuming, will you accept in a future batch a pre-product hardware company, and why or why not?
You know, I think that it's interesting. I think that there are different kind of phases almost in the startup world as I've seen them. And there was a phase, especially for consumer hardware, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where Kickstarter was really going and where there are a lot of consumer hardware companies. And for the most part, they all died. And so if you're building a consumer hardware company and you're not speaking to why you won't have the same fate that they did, if you're building a consumer hardware company and you're not studying what mistakes they made, it's going to be very hard for you to get in. If you are building a consumer hardware company and you have looked and you look at all that failure and you say there's got to be something I can learn from it, let me go try to learn from it, you probably have a better chance of getting it. If you're building a hard tech company and you're not wrestling with the idea that, like, while VCs in kind of the pop culture Twitter thing talk about hard tech all the time, the reality is that most of the successful hard tech companies are actually in some way government funded, are some way not traditionally VC funded alone. SpaceX and Tesla being great examples of both government funded companies. If you're not kind of wrestling with that, and we don't see you trying to understand that, we just see you following random VC tweeting about hard tech, you're not demonstrating that you're understanding this is 100 times harder than a software company. So if you're not demonstrating that you understand and you're planning for the fact that doing a hardware company is 10 times harder, and over the past 20 years, there have been very few successes, then it's going to be harder to get in. If you are considering those things and communicating your thoughts on those things, it's going to be easier to get in.
Yeah, totally. And last question, Michael, which is a question I see a lot. What can solo founders do in their application to make it stronger?
I think the first question I'd ask myself is, why are you a solo founder? Like, what is the thing that is why you're justifying being a solo founder, right? Oh, well, I don't know anyone who's good. Okay, well, how are you going to recruit people, right? If you're going to build this company that serves people with a real problem, you need to recruit people. If you don't know anyone who's good, how are you going to recruit your first employee? I don't trust anyone. Same question. How are you going to trust your first employee? I had a problem with my last co-founder. Well, that seems like that's overlearning the lesson. Maybe you picked a co-founder poorly last time. That doesn't mean co-founders were bad. That means your pick was bad. Maybe you should think about who you're picking better. I don't need a co-founder because I'm outsourcing engineering. We fund tech companies. Tech companies should be able to build tech.
Right.
And so more often than not, I feel like solo founders are not challenged on why they're solo founders, on why it's strategic for them to be a solo founder. And so that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say is the way that you prove our bias against solo founders wrong is you disproportionately make more progress, right? If I'm reading an application or doing an interview with a solo founder company that's made more progress than the company with 3 co-founders, well, that's hard to ignore. And we fund solo founders every batch as a result, because some of them come in and they're just figuring out how to make a lot of progress. Right. But yeah, like fundamentally though, I think what needs to be explained is that this is a team sport. Like, this is a team sport, and everyone who wants to fund you is thinking in the back of their head, can this person build a massive team? And recruiting good founders, co-founders, is actually the first way you can demonstrate that. And so you're taking a big potential proof point off the board by being a solo founder. I think that's not spoken about enough. That's
great. Well, Michael, I know we're 4 minutes over, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. Thank you so much for the insightful advice and feedback. And founders, we will follow up with you with the application link so you can go ahead and apply to the next YC batch. Thank you again, Michael. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was great seeing everyone. Cheers.
All right. Okay, so we are going to get into our YC alumni panel. If Jake and Pedro and Lauren can jump on the video, we can get started. Hey, Jake.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Lauren.
Hey, how's it going, Jackie?
Good. Hey, Pedro. Right.
Hello, everyone. Just changing my
Hey.
cameras very quick. There we
Sure.
go.
Oh, there you are. Okay, great. So obviously Michael was incredible and super helpful, and it was really interesting to hear his perspective. But I think it would be very helpful for the founders tuned in to learn about a little bit more about your experience with YC and how you prepared your application. So let's kick things off with a round of introductions. If you guys can tell us a bit more about your startup, how many times you applied to YC, and at what stage was your startup when you applied? That would be super helpful. Pedro, do you want to jump in first?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. So we applied. Actually, we started in event 2013. I'm a Brazilian citizen. We started actually me, Vinny, and Mauricio. We are three co-founders. We were in college, studying engineering, computer engineering, etc. And we had this, magical idea about YC that was going to be like we wanted to meet with PG and all those things. And that was a playbook. Like we read all the Y Combinator stuff every single day. In 2013, 14, we applied to YC. We had like zero revenue or like 50, below like 10K. And we thought about applying. We applied. We didn't have an interview or anything. And then for the next 5 years, we have built the company. We were able to get to about $1 million in revenue in about 4 years later. And then we decided that our product had a really strong fit with the US market. And we decided that we needed to be here in America, and build the company worldwide and help out a lot of things. So we applied to IC, and then at this time we were successful. And we actually didn't expect that. It was something unexpected. We were like thinking maybe we need to apply to a different accelerator, and then we got in the next last year on the summer program.
That's great. Lauren, you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, I am CEO and co-founder of Gaiascope, and we're basically just an energy quant fund that trades electricity. So we're trying to improve predictions of electricity prices both in space and time, and use that information to, in the short term, trade. And we have like grand plans in the long term of doing a lot more with that type of model that we're building out. But that's really our focus right now. And our story to YC is very different from Pedro's. We applied once and got in on our first time. My co-founder Jess and I, we actually met in November of 2018, incorporated Gaiascope in March of 2019, and applied and got in that summer. We applied with no product, basically an idea and passion and conversations, and actually went into the application and the interview thinking like, we're probably not going to go even if we get it. So it was definitely an interesting experience and a really positive one, I think, and we're really glad that we did it. But it was not kind of like what we envisioned the company path being from the start.
Interesting. Jake?
Hey, guys. Jake Sipe. I work on the startup BD team here alongside Jackie as well. Started a company called CompGun, which went through YC in winter 2016. We did sales commission software as a service. So the vision was to create a system of record for any sales commission calculations and payouts. We applied to YC 3 times overall. The first time it was just an idea and some customers that said that they were interested. The second time it was not much progress and like probably a worthy rejection. And then the third time, we grew to about, I think we're at $200,000 in ARR at that point across 10 customers. And that's what got us in.
Super cool. Lauren, so you said you applied with an idea. How did you show, the market opportunity and customer demand in your application with really no MVP or product?
Yeah, so the way that we've gone about kind of vetting our idea and making sure that we weren't diluting ourselves, let alone diluting YC, was to just talk to experts in the area and try to say, like, if this existed, would you use it? And got a lot of feedback on the idea itself before we actually had much tangible to show. And by meeting with various players in the electricity space, be it generators, be it traders, be it people in the utilities themselves, we really got a good understanding of how they work there and kind of had this epiphany of like, oh my gosh, nobody there uses data or uses even software past the 1980s. So we had a really strong sort of support there saying like, we know the current system really well, and we've had a lot of people tell us like, we'd love a better way, we'd love new ways to do it. The types of things you're describing sound amazing. And we felt really confident then going in, being like, hey, we're on to something. We just need to like execute and make this happen.
Yeah, a lot of the times what I hear is if you have an idea, go talk to customers, right? YC is all about throughout the program, talk to customers, talk to users, get more feedback. So for every founder that's joined us and only has an idea, that's a one thing I got, Lauren, from your answer and from Kat's video earlier, is just talk to customers and use those customer interviews in your application to prove customer demand. Cool. So Jake, you applied with a product. What kind of data did you use in your application to make it really compelling?
Yeah, so I'd say actually the first time we applied, we were just starting to create the product, but when we got in, like, we had product. And interestingly, it wasn't really so much about product data in the way that you would think about like a typical consumer apps product data, like monthly active users, daily active users. For us, it was really just growth rates, average deal size, price per seat per month, and then the names of the clients. So I think customers and product data and traction, it really it's going to vary and be specific to the different types of businesses that you're working on.
Yeah, totally. That totally makes sense. I'm going to take some questions too from the audience. Steve asked, could you share perspective on one of the YC application questions when they ask about what's the most impressive thing you've accomplished? Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
I can start off with that one. Obviously, I'm not speaking for YC, I'm speaking from my personal experience answering this, but I viewed it more of kind of like, what do I value as a person? As opposed to sort of like, what do I think other people value in me? And instead of approaching it for myself from a standpoint of what do other people would say would be like really impressive that I've done, which might be academic or many other things, I actually sort of myself was like, the thing I value most is kind of my interaction with other people. So I actually used an example there of how one of my students, I talked off of a suicidal cliff. And that was, in my mind, what I thought like showed my values as a human more than like being kind of just a bullet mark on a resume.
Wow, that's powerful. Jake or Pedro, do you remember?
I think mine was really technical. Like I think we were talking about a previous project that we had before college, and we actually built one of the first peer-to-peer services in our country. So we're able to, like, we're running this program that where all the gaming servers were there. Actually, I started when I was programming was 16, but Mauricio, our co-founder, started when he was 11, and he had this server, sharing like about terabit of data every month, and that was in the 2000s and like 2010 or so. So that was kind of crazy at the time that he was able to deploy so much data and work through this. So I think that was one of the things that we did was actually like the ability to write a project and have like 10-15,000 users at the beginning of the career. I think it was a thing that we allowed to be impressed in. Yeah.
Great. Fausto has a question for you, Pedro, again. How long have you launched before applying to YC?
So I think like for us, the thing that got us into IC, of course, I'm speaking from my personal experience too, because they didn't tell like we got in because of this. But I think like when we were talking with other co-founders, you know, doing our training calls and see what we should do on the mock-ups, and they told us like you should try three things that you think are really differential about your business, that because you know the partners are looking at so many different startups, like they go through thousands of startups applications every batch. So you need to say three things that they're going to remember you no matter what happens. You know, no matter what else you do on those 10 minutes, they're going to remember what are those three things. And what we shared from Innovent side was like we were able to get we bootstrapped the company without any outside investment to $1 million a year in revenue in a country where, like in Brazil, which is really hard to get to $1 million because the dollar to the local currency, it's like 10 to 1. So I think those were three things, like bootstrapped, $1 million, and in a place where it's hard to see a company doing $1 million a year. So I think those were the three things that we made sure that we repeated like 3 times during the interview. I think that was one of the main things that we shared, and we're able to get them to use to understand that Innovent was more than a solid product, was actually a solid business. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Jake, you mentioned you applied multiple times to YC. What do you think were the final changes that got you accepted?
Really, it just came down to, I think, like traction, honestly. And one of the benefits that YC has is that they can start off with, you know, these ideas or these teams or both that they're super skeptical of. But because, you know, YC is like, I think, such a special group, people will come back and keep applying. And yeah, first it was, hey, we got an idea. Then it was, hey, we've got like a product and not much traction. And then it was like, okay, like we built the product and we've got like real traction. And that was what I think what got us in.
That's great. Lauren, there's a question in the chat about you talking to customers. So how did you chat with utilities? Did you go through connections or did you reach out cold?
Yeah, so we went through a lot of connections. I am incredibly lucky that my co-founder is an absolute rock star and spent 10 years in industry building out a massive network in the energy space. So we really pulled on a lot of people that she knew and also kind of just leveraged her network a lot to kind of be like, hey, can you connect us with somebody here? So thankfully, because of her background, we had a lot of ins. I think otherwise it's a lot harder. But you would be amazed, even with like people you cold call, at their willingness to kind of talk and explain things, like especially when it's somebody that's passionate about what they're doing. A lot of people really love opening up about kind of what's happening behind the curtain that the rest of the world doesn't see.
Yeah, totally. What was everyone's most favorite or most impactful part of YC when you went through it? Jake, what was like the best part about YC?
Oh man, there's so many good parts. It's hard to narrow it down. Like the energy, like is amazing. Just like the group of people that you get together that are like so scrappy and so passionate, and also so diverse. Like we had people in our batch that were like, I think in their like mid 50s who had like been professors for a while. And then we also had people like an 18-year-old kid who dropped out of school and was just like so driven and brilliant. So I'd say it's just getting together with the community and being around those people who are so excited about what they're doing.
Well, Lauren, any thoughts there?
I know one of the things we loved was actually just physically all being in the same space, living together, working together, and just like that environment was really powerful, especially starting. My co-founder and I, we were really unique that we started this company on opposite coasts. So I was living in Seattle at the time and she was in New York City, and we'd only met in person twice before Y Combinator. Yeah. So it was, for us, phenomenal to just be together so much and just kind of have that amazing synergy also with our first employee who joined us out there on a leap of faith. Her day one was flying to California to be with us. And just the progress you make in that setting as opposed to like when everybody has their normal life going on is very different and very special.
Lauren, how did you meet your co-founder? That's so interesting.
We met through a mutual friend. I almost describe it as like we were kind of blind dating co-founders. I initially had tried a little bit of a different startup with another co-founder that it was just not the right relationship fit. And a friend who kind of knew that like I was interested in going this route and had also very close with my co-founder Jess was like, you two, I think would really, really get along. So we were kind of set up that way. We talked on the phone once and then made the decision of like, let's fly somewhere and meet each other and just like basically spent a full day together of kind of like heart to heart. Who are we as people? If we build a company together, what would we do? And just really resonated. And she's phenomenal. I could not ask for a better person to build a company with.
Wow, that's amazing. And Pedro, you said you've known your co-founder since you were kids.
No, actually, we met in college.
In college.
Actually, my co-founder Vinny, yeah, me and Vinny, we were actually from the same city, but we never met until we traveled, like because our college and where we were born was like 1,000 miles apart, but we were able to travel to the same college and meet there. So that was really great. I think like from my YC experience, what I think is really different is that we got in with an expectation of something and it was quite different. It was something that we had to learn through the process because when we got the call that we were approved to be part of YC, we're like, oh man, that's like we're now successful, you know, like we got into, you know, the best accelerator, it's going to be awesome, like we're going to raise like $5 million so easily. I think it's a busy program. Like you have 200 companies per batch these days, and I think a lot of people compare to the early days where you had access to like BG and you had like 10 companies per batch. And I think it has evolved to be this really great platform where you can meet with great people, but you have to do the work. Like you have to be there to, you know, talk to the customers. Like nobody's going to just send you the customers and they're going to purchase like $1,000 for you. You need to find the customers. You need to understand how to leverage this and how to use the YC brand to meet with customers, with companies, and deploy the first successful cases. So it took a little bit of like, I would say 30 days for us to understand that and be able to go to next. Yeah.
Oh.
So
Yeah,
that was a little.
I think that's so important, Pedro, to say, because like at the end of the day, like, you know, YC can't, you know, raise funds for you, like they can't like, you know, build a team for you. Like as Michael said, like these are all really, really hard things. And despite like how selective YC is, most YC grads, you know, are gonna like fail at building like a large scale business. So yeah, YC is amazing, but it's not going to solve all your business problems. And I feel like people have the same misconception around fundraising. You know, they think like, oh, things are going to get so much easier after I get my Series A. It's like, nope, you just have more people on the cap table and more work to do. So well said. Yeah,
and just to share a little bit, like on that specific topic, like our competitor these days, the company just raised $50 million a month ago, and we raised like about $1 million. We're getting business just because of the product standard and, you know, the reviews that we get from customers, because that's what customers are all interested about. They just want to see your demonstration, your product, what it can do for them, no matter how much money you have raised. Like it helps you to hire more people. That's the difference. But everything else is just all on you. Like you have to deliver the product, you have to work on those things and find the customers. Yeah.
So the founders that joined us are planning to or considering applying to the next batch, so possibly the Winter 21 batch. If you could give one piece of feedback on them preparing their application, what would it be?
Happy to take a first stab at that.
Yeah, sure.
Demonstrate clear thinking in your application and be very direct. You know, don't mince words, don't use too many superlatives. Just like make sure that when anybody reads your application, they understand that you're thinking very clearly about the problem you're trying to solve and rigorously.
I think the one thing I'll add is you don't need to have all the answers yet. I think you need to know what the questions are, and you need to understand what you're facing and sort of what steps you'll take to get those questions answered. But you don't need to go in feeling like I've figured it all out, because if you figured it all out, you're not a startup anymore, and like you're off to the races already. But it is really important that you show like, I know what I'm going to be up against, and I know the steps I'm going to take to get around it.
I'll just compliment Laura and say like you need to find what's unique about your business, in the sense of like what's unique, not about business, but about you, about the team, about the product. You just need to show that, like, why do you think it's unique? Like, you can say like, it's unique because I know this market so well. I have like 10 years of experience, or I have this product, I have these customers, or I have this insight. And that's how you're going to differentiate from the others, is how unique you know something that it's going to surprise the partners. Yeah.
Pedro, there's a lot of founders on the call from Latin America and Canada, right? Not US countries. Any feedback you can give since you applied while you were still in Brazil?
Like, to be frank, like the feedback that I got set is a bit like, it's going to be more competitive for us. We usually per batch we have about 10 to 15. I don't know the numbers. We need to look at that on the blog. But the numbers of companies from Latin America, it's one of the parts of the batch that's going to be competitive to get in. So your application really needs to stand out. Like you need to make something that's really clear for them. But then once you get in, there is a great community there. Like I've been able to meet great co-founders, people that on my batch, they were able to do great things too. So I just say that like the pool of capital and how we're going to raise money, it's something more competitive for Latin American founders, like in general, not just on the YC process, but later, because IC doesn't differentiate, but later the investors, they're going to know, they're going to require where you're going to do business and everything. So that's something that we went through the process to understand exactly the difference when we were raising capital last year.
Yeah, interesting. So you all had interviews, the 10-minute interview, the infamous 10-minute interview. Jake, how did you prepare for the interview? And then walking out of the interview, were you like, I did good, or oh man, that sucked?
Yeah, I actually, so I walked out of that interview like having a pretty good sense that I had gotten in, because I think it was like Kevin Hale or one of the partners like came back and asked us the question about like you guys are already located here, right? Or like it was like one of those like questions where it's like you wouldn't ask that if you like were going to reject me, right? I can't remember what the exact question was. And in terms of preparation, I think we just tried to make sure. So we had all of our like smartest friends just drill us on like all the like toughest questions they thought they could think of, and then we made sure that every single point that we hit on in our application, we were ready to like speak to like any questions about those. And then we, took a deep breath and just smiled because it was cool to be down at the YC office in Mountain View.
Lauren, what was your experience like with your interview?
Oh man, it flew by. It was so quick. Jess and I prepared a lot by kind of just going through different online questions and trying to get our answers really tight. So we knew kind of like, these are the 3 things walking in we want to make sure the partners understand. And also knew for different questions that came up, kind of who was going to tackle it, what the key talking points were going to be, and how we say it as succinctly as possible. The actual interview itself was really interesting for us because we definitely got thrown for a loop when we were talking about kind of the models we wanted to build and these ideas that we have, and like we're just point blank asked, like, if what you're building is so great, why don't you just become a hedge fund and trade yourselves? And it was just like kind of a pivotal point in the interview where I think Jess and I looked at each other and we're like, sure, we could do that. And like it actually like totally shifted the direction of our company, and we went in that moment from being a SaaS company wanting to sell to other people to being like, yeah, no, we'll go trade ourselves. Like, here are the steps we'd have to take. Yeah, let's do it. And we walked out and we like had no idea. We're like, well, we just like totally shifted ideas, like in terms of becoming a hedge fund as opposed to being a SaaS product. And we're like, we have no idea if that went well or not. It was really interesting. It made us think really hard. And it was definitely a surprise when we got the phone call that afternoon being like, we'd like you to join.
Wow.
Nice.
Pedro, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think for us, like the first thing is that the partners are going to be there for partners on our case. And the first thing that I realized that like I had a call with Paul Bouquet, and he was like, he's the founder of Gmail. And you just need to, like, this is the founder of Gmail, like he's in front of me, like I want to ask him questions, not the opposite, you know. And then that's the first thing that I thought about. And the second thing is not to talk over like the other co-founders. So even in this system, I would tap on the shoulder, on the leg of the other person, say like, that's your time, and we'll coordinate that so we're not talking over each other. And like, and the experience for us was a bit different. Like we thought that the partners would be like really asking a lot of questions, like really excited, but they're actually really calm, and they just had this, you know, very calm posture of like asking what an event was doing and everything, and like what you're going to do for events, or how virtual events, how that's going to work. And then we answered them, and it was pretty calm, and we didn't expect that. We expected it was going to be a really, you know, like this discussion, you know, and everything. So that was our experience.
That's great. So Aaron asked a question. I think it's really great in the question chat. If you don't have experience with startups, and Lauren, I think you said you've never worked at a startup before. Like, do you need to share your prior experience? How did you share your prior experience to show that, yeah, you can be a startup founder and a very successful one?
Well, I think being a successful startup founder, I think Michael talked a little bit about it, is more of just like, how do you get around the roadblocks in your life? And like, you don't need to have seen roadblocks in a startup setting to know how you persevere around a problem, how you answer questions, how you leverage what you can to just get over whatever roadblock is in your way. So I came in, I had no experience in any type of business ever. I was a pure academic at heart, like straight through, never left school, quit my postdoc to come do this. But like, you're definitely going to have seen, like, nobody really gets to this point in life and hasn't had obstacles and hasn't had roadblocks. And I think being clear about what you've struggled with and how you've overcome things is really important. And I think also being honest of like, you're not going to have all the answers, and like being aware of like, there's going to be new challenges. And like, I was very aware. I was like, I've never managed somebody before. I'm going to have to learn how to do that. And like, knowing where you're going to struggle and how you're going to get past those struggles when you're entering from a new setting and not the startup world is also really important.
Totally. All right, and last question. Jake, we've reviewed a lot of YC applications over the years together. Is there any specific advice you'd give teams that have college students as founders?
Ooh, that's a really good question. You know, like, I think like college students often feel like they're at a disadvantage because they might have less professional experience, where they don't have, you know, so much to speak to. And I think, like, you know, it's sort of like, you know, to piggyback off of the question that Lauren was just answering, like, it's the same thing as like sort of having not been in a startup before. You're like, I haven't even worked before, so how do I answer this? But college students, like, yeah, just focus on your knowledge of the problem, your passion for solving it, and then the like scrappy things that you've done, you know, to get things moving in the right direction. Yeah, it really, like, all of this comes down to like, make progress. Like, if you can make progress against your goal, it doesn't matter who you are, what your background is. I think, you know, YC will fund you if they believe in you in the market. So highlight that.
Totally. Jake and I, we worked with a startup that came directly out of college, and their application was so strong because you could just immediately tell how fast they were building, how many customers they were talking to, and they just had such intense passion. It was very, very obvious in their application. So for college students out there, you know, we see lots of college students getting into YC. That shouldn't be a barrier. It's an opportunity to really position yourself as a great future startup founder. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists, for joining and dropping knowledge for all these founders that joined us today. I'll stay after and I'll start answering some of these questions, but I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you for having us, Jackie.
Thanks for having us.